My name is Eliza Gray, and I'm 27 years old. I never imagined I'd see my own sister watch, with a smirk on her face, as I was choked to the point of blacking out. She just stood there, arms crossed, while her husband repeatedly slammed me around, dislocating my shoulder and leaving my face a swollen mess. It wasn't out of fear, it wasn't a mistake. It was because I refused to sign for a loan. That's all it took to turn family into witnesses and silence into the ultimate betrayal. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from. Please support me by liking this video and subscribe if you agree that a home should be the safest place on earth, not the most dangerous battlefield. It was a Saturday afternoon in Fayetteville, a day of brittle peace, the kind of quiet that feels earned after a long week on base. My ritual was always the same: break down, clean, and reassemble my standard issue M17 service pistol. The methodical process, the scent of gun oil, the satisfying click of metal sliding into place, was a form of meditation for me. It was the one time my mind, always running threat assessments and strategic scenarios, could fall silent. In the controlled, predictable mechanics of the firearm, I found my center. That center was shattered by the crunch of tires on the gravel outside my apartment complex. I didn't need to look. I recognized the sound of Julian's oversized Lincoln Navigator, a vehicle that always seemed to announce its arrival with unearned arrogance. They hadn't called. They never did. The unspoken rule in the Gray family was that my time, my space, and my boundaries were merely suggestions, easily overridden by their whims. The door opened and my sister, Serafina, swept in. She brought with her a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and the suffocating atmosphere of wealthy suburban entitlement. Her eyes, sharp and critical, did a slow scan of my meticulously organized apartment. Everything had a place, a reflection of a life built on order, a stark contrast to the chaos of our upbringing. "Still looks like a dorm room, Ellie," she said, her voice dripping with pity that wasn't pity at all. "When are you going to start actually living?" Each word was a needle dipped in poison, aimed directly at the choices I had made. The life of discipline I had forged for myself, my career as a captain in the Army Medical Corps, was, in her eyes, not living. It was merely a placeholder for the life of McMansions and country club memberships she considered the standard. They hadn't come empty-handed, of course. Julian lumbered in behind her, carrying a case of local craft IPA and a large aluminum tray of slow-smoked BBQ ribs from a place down on Hay Street he knew was my favorite. It was a classic tactical maneuver, soften the target before the assault, a peace offering before the war. They settled onto my couch as if they owned it. Julian placed a thick manila folder on my coffee table and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped just short of my cleaning mat. It felt less like an offering and more like an ultimatum. "This is your chance to give back to the family, Ellie," Julian began, his tone that of a magnanimous benefactor. He leaned back, spreading his arms across the back of the couch. He then reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a cigarette and a familiar, worn silver Zippo. My breath caught in my throat. It was my father's, the one he'd carried through 2 tours in Desert Storm. Julian flicked it open with a casual thumb, that iconic metallic click echoing in the sudden silence of the room, and lit his cigarette, the flame dancing for a moment on a sacred relic. He blew a stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "Mom and Dad invested a lot in you. West Point doesn't come cheap. It's time for you to invest back." Just like that, he had done it. He had twisted years of parental love and support into a cold, hard transaction. I was no longer their daughter. I was a stock that had matured, and it was time for them to cash in. My signature, I now understood, was the only dividend they were interested in. My hands felt steady as I picked up the folder. The screaming in my head was a distant roar, easily compartmentalized. I flipped through the pages. My eyes, trained to scan complex intelligence reports and casualty assessments in seconds, devoured the numbers. The loan amount was astronomical. The terms were predatory: a variable interest rate, a cross-collateralization clause that would tie my own assets to their debt. It wasn't a business plan. It was a financial suicide pact, a perfectly crafted trap. I placed the papers back on the table, aligning them with the corner. This isn't a loan, I said, my voice quiet but as hard as steel. This is a financial death sentence. Sarah let out a little laugh, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my last nerve. It was the same laugh she used as a child, right after she'd pushed me and claimed it was an accident. Oh, little sister, you're always so dramatic. It's just paperwork. A simple formality. You just sign, and it's done. It's just paperwork. That sentence detonated in the quiet of the room. It vaporized my entire career. It erased the years of study, the grueling physical training, the sleepless nights in field hospitals, the weight of holding a soldier's life in my hands. All of it. The discipline, the sacrifice, the honor. Reduced to a mere formality. My life's work, my credit, my very identity as Captain Eliza Gray, was nothing more than a procedural step in their get-rich-quick scheme. The rage inside me was a white-hot, silent inferno. My old drill instructor at West Point used to bark at us. Hesitation kills you faster than an enemy's bullet. I did not hesitate. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached out, closed the manila folder, and placed it neatly on the corner of the table. I looked directly at Julian, then at my sister. I'm not signing, I said. My voice was devoid of emotion, a flat statement of fact. The shift in the room was immediate. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken fury. Sarah's practiced smile froze, cracked, and then twisted into an ugly sneer of disbelief and anger. Julian's face darkened. He surged to his feet, shoving the chair he was in backwards. Its legs shrieked against the hardwood floor, a raw, violent sound that ripped through the tense silence. You'll regret this, Eliza, he spat, his voice low and menacing. Family isn't something you can just turn your back on. They stormed out, leaving the case of beer and the tray of ribs untouched on my floor. They left the silence, now heavy and charged like the air before a lightning strike. The lock on my front door clicked shut, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. This wasn't the end. This was the opening salvo. I knew this was just the first skirmish. The war had just begun. After the failed ambush at my apartment, the direct assault ceased. It was replaced by something far more insidious. My phone, once a tool for connection, became a weapon turned against me. The campaign began subtly. A text message would buzz and I'd see a photo from our childhood pop up on the screen. It was a picture of me, around 12 years old, helping Sarah with her algebra homework. I remembered that night. She'd been crying because she was failing the class. I had stayed up with her until midnight, patiently explaining the equations until she finally understood. Sarah's caption read, "You were always the smart one, Ellie. Use that intelligence the right way." It wasn't a compliment, it was a command, wrapped in the guise of a fond memory. Another message arrived a day later. It was a short video clip from my West Point graduation. The camera was shaky, but you could see my father, his face beaming with a pride so pure it was almost painful to watch now. He was telling someone off camera, "That's my girl, my captain." But Sarah's text underneath twisted the moment into a weapon. "Dad would be so disappointed to see you now." She was mining our shared history for ammunition, turning my father's love into a tool of emotional blackmail. Each notification was a calculated strike, designed to chip away at my resolve, to make me question my own judgment, to drown me in a manufactured sea of guilt. It was a psychological siege, and I was the lone defender of my own sanity. Then, on Thursday, a delivery truck pulled up. A floral arrangement was left at my door. It was a large funereal spray of white lilies, the kind you see resting on a casket. The scent was cloying, filling my small apartment with the smell of a wake. Tucked inside was a small card, written in Sarah's elegant looping script. "Thinking of you. Hope you reconsider before it's too late." It wasn't a peace offering, it was a threat, beautifully packaged. But the most devastating blow didn't come from Sarah's psychological warfare. It came from her most powerful ally, our mother. She called on Sunday evening, right around 7, the time she knew I'd be home, winding down for the week. Her voice on the other end of the line was heavy with a practiced weariness, the sound of a martyr resigned to her suffering. "Ellie, I don't want to take sides," she began. And with that single classic lie, I knew she already had. It's the opening line of every collaborator who has already chosen their allegiance. But your sister is under a lot of stress, she continued, her voice a low, pleading sigh. Julian, too. This whole thing. It's been very hard on them. Can't you just bend a little? For the peace of the family. The words hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I felt a cold calm settle over me. The peace of the family, Mom? I asked, my voice level, devoid of the emotion churning inside me. Or your peace and quiet? There was a long pause on the other end, a silence so profound I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, she let out another long-suffering sigh. You always have to make things so complicated, Eliza. And there it was. In one sentence, she had convicted me. I, the one who had been threatened, insulted, and now assaulted, was the troublemaker. The one asking for basic respect was the one making things complicated. Her words didn't just hurt, they unlocked a door to a memory I'd kept buried for years. The phone call ended, but I was no longer in my Fayetteville apartment. I was 19 again, crumpled at the bottom of the oak staircase in our family home in Ohio, a blinding, searing pain shooting through my left shoulder. Sarah was at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of panic, not of concern for me, but of fear for herself. She had shoved me during an argument, and my feet had tangled, sending me tumbling down. But the memory that cut the deepest wasn't the fall. It was the car ride to the emergency room. My mother was driving, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She never once asked if I was in pain. She never asked what happened. She just reached over, her grip tight on my good arm, and repeated the same phrase over and over like a mantra. You slipped. You tell them you slipped and fell. Do you hear me, Ellie? Sarah has her whole future ahead of her. One little mistake could ruin everything for her. She taught me a vital lesson that day. My pain didn't matter. My truth was irrelevant. My body was secondary to my sister's pristine image. She didn't teach me to be strong. She taught me to be silent. My silence was the currency for her peace. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the darkness of my living room, the faint glow of the streetlights painting stripes on the floor. An old, familiar ache throbbed in my left shoulder, a phantom pain that echoed the fresh wound in my heart. And in that moment, I understood with chilling clarity. My silence at 19 was the first brick in the path to this personal hell. My mother's tolerance, her desperate need to maintain a flawless family facade, had given Sarah and Julian an unspoken permission slip. It had taught them that their actions had no consequences, that my boundaries were meaningless. While sitting there, I pulled out my phone and idly scrolled. I came across a lecture by a psychologist, a video about a term I'd heard but never truly applied to myself: gaslighting. As he listed the signs, questioning your memory, twisting your words, using what they know you love against you, it was as if he was reading a playbook of my family's entire history. I finally looked up, and my reflection stared back at me from the dark screen of my phone. I saw the faint outline of a woman in her late 20s, her face drawn and tired. But I saw something else too. I saw the uniform I had earned. I saw a captain in the United States Army. I took an oath to protect this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Tonight, I made a new oath, a quiet promise to myself in the dark. I would protect myself from the enemies within my own family. My mother's voice from the past whispered, "Don't make a scene." But a stronger voice, my own, answered it. This cycle ends here, it ends with me. My decision to make things complicated did not go unnoticed. The psychological warfare shifted, becoming something far more tangible, more invasive. The escalation began quietly, in the pre-dawn gloom of a Monday morning. On my way out for physical training, the air still cool and damp, my boot brushed against something on the welcome mat. I looked down. It was a small piece of paper, folded into a neat, precise square that had been pushed under my door. Even in the dim light, I recognized the elegant, slanted handwriting. It was Sarah's. My heart gave a hard, single knock against my ribs. I picked it up. The paper felt thin and brittle, cold from the night air. The note was simple. Family is forever. Don't make the wrong decision. It wasn't a direct threat, but the implication was a physical presence. It meant one of them had stood right here, on my doorstep, while I slept. My sanctuary, the one place on earth I had absolute control, had been breached. The feeling was a cold stain spreading through my chest. I didn't crumple it up. I didn't throw it away. My training took over, a series of conditioned responses overriding the initial shock. Back inside, I pulled on a pair of latex gloves from my medical kit, carefully placed the note into a Ziploc bag, and took out a Sharpie. I wrote the date and time on the bag's white strip and sealed it. My soldier's instinct had taken over. This was no longer just a note. This was Exhibit A. A few days later, the violation grew more personal. I came out of the commissary to find another note, this one tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. It was positioned with deliberate cruelty, stark white against the faded blue of the proud daughter of a veteran bumper sticker my dad had placed there himself, years ago. He had smoothed it on with a grin, saying, "So everyone knows you're one of the good ones, Ellie Belly." Now Sarah's words sat on top of his memory. "You think you're so strong. You're not." They weren't just threatening me, they were defiling his legacy, using my love for him as another pressure point. That night, the threat became mobile. The black Lincoln Navigator returned. It was just after midnight. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt different. Not peaceful, but a heavy listening silence. Then I saw it. It pulled up across the street, killing its engine, its tinted windows reflecting the erratic flicker of a faulty streetlight. He didn't get out. He just sat there, a silent, hulking presence in the dark. In combat, the threat is known, often visible. You engage, you neutralize, you survive. This was different. This was a psychological invasion, a violation of the soul. Any other woman might have hidden, called 911. But I was trained to face the things that lurk in the dark. It was the Owada loop, an endless cycle drilled into me at West Point. Observe, orient, decide, act, observe. A hostile entity is conducting surveillance. Orient. The entity is my brother-in-law. His intent is intimidation. Decide. I will not show fear. I will gather intelligence. Act. I moved through my apartment, turning off each light until I was cloaked in darkness. Staying back from the window, I raised my military-grade binoculars. The lenses cut through the night, and there he was, the faint glow of his phone illuminating his face. My breathing was slow and even. I took out my own phone, braced it against the window frame for stability, and took several clear, high-resolution photos of the Navigator, ensuring the license plate was perfectly legible. I logged the time he arrived, 12:17 a.m. An hour later, I logged the time he left, 1:22 a.m. He thought he was the hunter. He had no idea the prey was building a file on him. The next day, I drove to Raleigh. Maya Chen's law office was a bastion of calm logic in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. I laid the Ziploc bags and the printed, time-stamped photos on her polished mahogany desk. She looked at everything, her face growing harder, her jaw tightening with each piece of evidence. "This isn't a family dispute anymore, Ellie," she said, tapping one of the photos with the end of her pen. "This is a clear pattern of harassment, stalking. But a judge will want more. They'll try to paint you as the unstable soldier, and this as circumstantial. We need undeniable, irrefutable proof." Her words were the final confirmation. That evening, my apartment officially became a forward operating base. I ordered a set of high-definition, wireless security cameras, tiny, discrete units with motion sensors and night vision. When they arrived, I spent hours installing them. Each camera placement was a strategic decision. One went inside a potted fern on the porch, its lens peering through the leaves. Another, disguised as a landscape stone, was nestled in the mulch by the walkway. A third, the size of a quarter, was embedded in the dark wood of my doorbell frame, giving me a perfect, wide-angle view of the entire parking lot. I'd set up defensive perimeters in deserts halfway across the world. I never imagined I'd have to do it in my own home. A cold, professional calm settled over me. I was no longer waiting for the next move. I was setting the board. Their patience finally ran out by the end of the week. The last note wasn't slipped under the door. It was plastered to the center of it with angry silver strips of duct tape. It was a public branding, a mark of their ownership. It read like a summons. Sunday dinner at Mom's. Be there and act right. This is your last chance. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it stole my breath. Act right. As if I were the one who had shattered the peace. They weren't inviting me, they were ordering me. I knew that dinner wasn't an attempt at reconciliation. It was a tribunal, an ambush. But in their supreme confidence, they made a fatal, tactical error. They gave me a time and a place. They gave me a battlefield of their own choosing. And they gave me time to prepare. The drive from North Carolina to Ohio was long and solitary. 8 hours on the highway, watching the landscape flatten and the trees turn to the familiar golds and reds of an Ohio autumn. With every mile, I felt like a soldier being deployed, driving deeper into enemy territory. The territory, in this case, was the sprawling suburban house where I grew up. As I pulled into the driveway, the familiar scent of my mother's roasted turkey hung in the air, a ghost of 1,000 happier Sundays. I could hear the murmur of conversation and bursts of laughter from inside. For a fragile moment, a foolish sliver of hope flickered within me. Maybe this won't be so bad. Maybe they'll listen. The hope died the second I opened the front door. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. A dozen pairs of eyes, my Uncle Robert, my Aunt Mary, my cousins, all locked onto me. It wasn't the warm gaze of family welcoming one of their own. It was the cold, unified stare of a jury watching a defendant walk into the courtroom. I could see it instantly. They had all been briefed. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a strategic operation, and I was the target. Before I could even take off my jacket, my Uncle Robert, a man I'd once adored for his fishing stories and easy laugh, intercepted me. He steered me into the den, his hand gripping my arm a little too tightly. "Ellie," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "You're a soldier. You're tougher than the rest of us. Just give your sister a break on this one, okay? We men, we don't like it when a woman is too rigid." The words hit me like a physical blow. He had reduced my strength, my career, my entire identity to a personality flaw. To him, my principles were just a woman being too rigid. The dinner itself was a masterclass in psychological torture. I was seated at the far end of the table, an island of isolation. They spoke around me, through me, as if I were a ghost at their feast. My cousin passed the bowl of mashed potatoes directly in front of my plate to his brother, his eyes never meeting mine. It was a deliberate, petty act of exclusion, and it was brutally effective. The conversation was a carefully orchestrated barrage of passive aggression. My Aunt Mary went on a long, loud monologue about how her son, Mark, had sacrificed to co-sign a mortgage for his younger sister. "That's what family does," she declared, looking pointedly down the table in my direction. "We lift each other up." Uncle Robert then launched into a speech about family duty and the sacred importance of preserving the bloodline, as if their get-rich-quick scheme was some noble ancestral quest. Every word was a veiled accusation, a piece of moral shrapnel aimed at me. And through it all, my mother sat at the head of the table, a silent queen presiding over my execution. She wore an expression of carefully crafted sorrow, the picture of a heartbroken matriarch. But her silence was more damning than any accusation. She was the commander of this army, and by saying nothing, she gave her full endorsement to the assault. She was watching her own daughter be torn apart by the pack, and she didn't lift a finger. As the meal wound down, my mother finally spoke. She didn't look at me. She stared down at the remnants of food on her porcelain plate and let out a heavy sigh, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Eliza," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured pain. "I just don't understand why you always have to fight this family. Your father. He would be so sad if he were here." That was the kill shot. The one weapon they knew I had no defense against. She took my hero, my moral compass, my one true ally in this family, and used his memory to shame me. A hot, bitter wave of grief and rage rose in my throat, choking me. My hand trembled as I set my fork down. The clink of silver against china was unnaturally loud in the sudden, expectant silence. "I'm done," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I walked out to the back porch, the cold autumn air a welcome shock to my system. I needed to breathe, to escape the suffocating weight of their judgment. A moment later, the screen door creaked open. Sarah glided out, a glass of red wine in her hand. The mask of civility was gone. "See," she said, her voice dripping with smug triumph. "There's no one on your side, Eliza. You're all alone in this." She took a slow, deliberate sip of wine, her eyes never leaving mine. She moved closer, the scent of her perfume and the wine mingling in the cold air. She leaned in, her lips close to my ear, and her voice dropped to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "You're going to sign it. You have no other choice." She paused, letting the words sink in. Then she delivered the final, contemptuous blow. "You won't do anything, little sister. You never do." My father used to read from Proverbs sometimes. There was one verse that came back to me then, clear as a bell. "Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." Sarah's words were meant to be a final insult, a reminder of every time I had backed down, every time I had chosen silence for the sake of peace. She thought she was burying me under the weight of my past. But this time, her words didn't extinguish the last of my fight. They ignited a fire. For 2 days after that catastrophic dinner, there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no notes under the door. It was a dead, unnerving silence that was far more menacing than any threat. I knew this wasn't an admission of defeat. This was the coiled silence of a predator gathering itself before the final lunge. My apartment was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a forward outpost. I lived in a state of heightened readiness, what we in the military call condition red. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I took short, 2-hour rests, always fully clothed. I checked the live feeds from my security cameras hourly, my eyes scanning the dark parking lot for any sign of the Black Navigator. My M17 service pistol, cleaned and loaded with a full magazine, sat in the nightstand drawer next to my bed. Its cold weight a grim comfort. I wasn't living in fear. Fear is a paralyzing emotion. This was different. This was vigilance. Every creak of the floorboards from the apartment above, every sweep of headlights across my window from the street, sent a jolt of electricity through me, my muscles tensing in automatic response. I was a soldier on watch, and the enemy was close. The storm broke on Tuesday night. My phone rang, the screen flashing an unknown number. My training protocol kicked in: never identify yourself first. I answered the call and said nothing, listening to the silence on the other end. Then his voice came through the speaker, a low, guttural rasp, thick with whiskey and rage. It was Julian. "You've got 10 minutes. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Have that folder signed and ready by the door. If you don't open it, I'll open it myself." The line crackled, and I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, a faint, indistinct murmur. It wasn't the sound of protest. It was the sound of encouragement. Then Julian added one last thing, his voice dropping to a sneer filled with contempt. "You think that uniform protects you, you bitch? When you're alone in your house, you're just another weak woman." I disconnected the call without a word. My heart didn't pound with fear. It began to beat with a slow, heavy, powerful rhythm, a war drum counting cadence. A surge of pure, cold adrenaline flooded my veins, sharpening my senses, clearing my mind of everything but the immediate threat. The game had changed. This was no longer about intimidation. This was about to be a physical assault. I glanced at the clock. Less than 5 minutes later, a pair of headlights cut a sharp, aggressive turn into my parking lot. It was the Lincoln Navigator. But this time, it didn't park discreetly across the street. It barreled forward, stopping directly in the spot beneath my living room window. The high beams flashed on, flooding my apartment with a blinding white light, pinning me in a theatrical spotlight. It was an act of raw, naked aggression. They wanted me to see them coming. They wanted me to be afraid. The driver's side door flew open and Julian stumbled out. He was drunk, unsteady on his feet, but his movements were fueled by a volatile energy. The passenger door opened and Sarah emerged. She moved with a chilling, almost serene calmness, her posture perfect, as if they were arriving at a gallery opening instead of preparing to break down my door. They made no attempt to be quiet or conceal their intentions. I didn't hide, I didn't cower. I stood back from the window, in the shadows, and watched them on the monitor connected to my camera feeds. I saw Julian go to the back of the SUV and open the trunk. My blood ran cold as he pulled out a long, metallic object, an aluminum baseball bat. He slammed the trunk shut, the sound echoing through the quiet night. My heart constricted, a tight, painful knot in my chest, but my mind was crystal clear. The chaos of the situation was filtered through the grit of my training. I moved with purpose, executing a mental checklist I'd rehearsed 100 times in the last 48 hours. Step 1. Secure the perimeter. I shot the deadbolt on my front door and engaged the secondary security chain. A flimsy defense, but it would buy me seconds. Step 2. Arm myself. I moved to the bedroom, slid open the nightstand drawer, and retrieved my M17. My hands were perfectly steady as I checked the magazine and chamber. The weight of the weapon was familiar, an extension of my own will. Step 3. Ensure evidence collection. I tapped a command on my phone, activating the emergency, cloud-based recording on all cameras. Whatever happened next would be documented. Step 4. Activate alert system. I strapped a small, unassuming watch to my wrist. It looked like a fitness tracker, but a hard press on its side sent a silent distress signal with my GPS coordinates to a private security firm and Maya. I took a deep breath, the air cool in my lungs. I remembered one of the first lessons in hand-to-hand combat training. Never let them corner you. Always create space, always know your exit. I backed away from the door, positioning myself in the entryway that led to the kitchen. It gave me a clear line of sight to the entrance but kept me out of their initial path of entry. I stood in the darkness of my home, weapon held in a low-ready position, listening to their approaching footsteps on the gravel. I was not a terrified little sister. I was not just another weak woman. I was Captain Eliza Gray. And I was defending my home. The first impact shuddered through the entire apartment. It wasn't the sound of a lock being picked. It was the blunt, percussive thud of a battering ram. Julian was using his full body weight, slamming his shoulder into the wood. The frame groaned. A second impact, harder this time. I heard the splintering crack of wood, like bones snapping. The security chain rattled, holding on for a desperate second before its screws were ripped from the frame. On the third slam, the door burst inward, torn from its hinges. It crashed against the wall as Julian stumbled into the entryway, a hulking silhouette against the harsh glare of the porch light. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils dilated with rage and alcohol. The aluminum baseball bat was gripped tight in his right hand, and behind him, Serafina. She didn't follow him in. She stopped perfectly framed in the ruined doorway, arms crossed over her chest. Her face was a blank canvas, devoid of any emotion. No fear, no concern, no shock. She was a spectator who had paid for a front row seat. She wasn't there to stop it. She was there to watch. "You think you're better than us?" Julian roared, the words slurring together as he lunged. I was in motion before he finished the sentence, sidestepping the wild, telegraphed swing of the bat. The metal whistled past my ear, inches from my head, and slammed into the wall, leaving a deep crater in the drywall. But he was bigger, heavier. He used the momentum of his swing to bring the bat around in a low arc, sweeping it against my legs. My feet went out from under me. I hit the hardwood floor hard, the impact jarring my teeth. The nightmare began. He tossed the bat aside, the metal clattering loudly on the floor. He preferred his hands. He lunged, grabbing a fistful of my hair and slamming my head back against the wall. The plaques and commendations I'd hung there, awards for service, for leadership, rained down around me, glass shattering. He shoved me away from the wall, sending me stumbling backward. My hips slammed into the corner of my small writing desk. There was a sharp crack and the tinkle of breaking glass. The only framed photo I owned, a picture of my father and me on the day I was commissioned as an officer, crashed to the floor, its glass face destroyed. Pain was a white-hot fog, but I was still fighting, trying to scramble away, to create space. He was on me in an instant, his weight crushing me. And then he brought his knee up, driving it with brutal, calculated force into my left shoulder, directly onto the old scar. A dry, sickening pop echoed in the small space. An agony I had never known, sharp and electric, shot down my arm, erasing thought, erasing everything but the fire. My arm went numb, useless. My shoulder was dislocated. I was on the floor, curled in a ball, my vision blurring at the edges. Julian straddled my chest, his heavy frame pinning me down. And then his hands were around my neck, his thumbs pressed into my windpipe, and the world dissolved. My air was cut off. I clawed at his wrists with my good arm, but it was like clawing at concrete. Black spots began to dance in my vision, multiplying, converging. Through the graying tunnel of my sight, I looked past his shoulder, toward the doorway. Sarah hadn't moved. She was still standing there, a statue of indifference. She was looking right at me, right into my eyes as the life was being squeezed out of me. There was no pity, no horror, nothing. And then she spoke. Her voice was calm, conversational, as if she were commenting on the weather. "You should have just signed it, Eliza," she said. "This all could have been so much easier." It wasn't the voice of a sister. It was the voice of a torturer explaining the reason for the pain. That voice, that absolute, chilling detachment. It was the slap in the face that brought me back from the brink of unconsciousness. It cut through the pain and the terror and ignited a single, freezing point of pure rage. The motto of the Medical Corps flashed in my mind: to conserve the fighting strength. My fighting strength was my life. I had to conserve it. My left arm was useless, but my right was still free. While Julian's focus was entirely on crushing my throat, I summoned the last of my strength. My fingers, clumsy and weak from oxygen deprivation, fumbled at my wrist. I found the side of the watch. I pressed my thumb down on the small, recessed button. There was a faint, tactile click, silent, unseen. The distress signal was sent, and in that same instant, I heard it. A faint, distant sound from far away. A siren. Then another, growing louder, closer, weaving through the night. Julian heard it too. His head snapped up. Sarah's blank expression finally broke, replaced by a flash of pure animal panic. Their eyes met over my body. The hunters had become the hunted. Their game was over. Before we go on, if you've ever felt betrayed by someone who should have protected you, please support me by hitting the like button. And let me know in the comments. Just type, "I stand with Eliza," if you believe no one should ever have to face that kind of darkness alone. By the time the military police kicked in what was left of my front door, Julian and Sarah were long gone. The wail of the sirens had sent them scurrying back into the darkness. They left behind a scene of utter devastation. My apartment looked like a battlefield. Shattered glass, overturned furniture, broken picture frames, and the dark, metallic scent of blood hanging in the air. I was propped against the far wall, cradling my useless left arm, trying to control the ragged, shallow breaths that were all my bruised ribs would allow. Blood from a gash on my forehead trickled down my temple, warm and sticky. The lead MP, a tall, broad-shouldered sergeant with a calm, authoritative presence, took in the scene with a quick, professional sweep of his eyes. He saw me, then the wreckage. He didn't ask the meaningless civilian question. "Are you okay?" Of course I wasn't okay. Instead, he knelt, maintaining a respectful distance, his eyes meeting mine. "Captain, I'm Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice a steady baritone. "Medics are en route. The scene is secure. Tell us what happened." "Captain?" He called me Captain. He saw my rank, not just my injuries. In that moment, something inside me that had been clenched tight for weeks finally began to unclench. I wasn't alone anymore. I was among soldiers. I was among my own. The paramedics arrived, a whirlwind of calm efficiency. As they began to assess me, their questions were direct and impersonal. About the pain, my breathing, the numbness in my arm. Before they helped me onto the gurney, I pointed with my good hand toward the coffee table. "There," I said, my voice a raw, hoarse whisper. "The folder." The manila folder was still there, spattered with a few dark drops of my own blood. It started with that, and these. Sergeant Miller was already there. I watched as another MP, wearing gloves, carefully picked up the Ziploc bags containing Sarah's notes. I had left them on the kitchen counter, ready. "Check the security system," I added, my voice cracking. "The porch, the doorbell, everything is on tape." Sergeant Miller nodded, his expression unreadable but professional. "We will, Captain," he assured me. He didn't look at me like a hysterical victim. He looked at me like a fellow officer providing critical intelligence, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. Maya was at the Womack Army Medical Center in under an hour. She must have broken every speed limit driving from Raleigh. She burst into the emergency room, her sharp business suit looking out of place amidst the scrubs and uniforms. She took one look at me. At the butterfly stitches on my forehead, the dark bruises already blooming on my cheek and jaw, my arm immobilized in a sling, and a fire I had never seen before ignited in her eyes. She didn't hug me or offer empty platitudes. Maya wasn't built that way. She pulled a chair up to my bedside, took out a yellow legal pad and a pen, and got straight to business. "Tell me everything, Ellie," she said, her voice a low, furious hum. "Every note, every phone call, every single detail from tonight. We are going to bury them." Her presence, her unwavering belief and righteous anger was like a transfusion of strength. The burden was no longer mine to carry alone. This was our fight now. 2 days later, the real war began. A lead investigator from the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, CID, came to my temporary quarters on base, accompanied by Maya. He was a chief warrant officer, a man with tired eyes that had seen the worst of human behavior. He carried a tablet. "Captain Gray," he began, his tone formal, but not unkind. "We've reviewed the footage from your security cameras." He turned the tablet toward me. Maya placed a steadying hand on my good shoulder. The video was grainy, shot in the stark black and white of night vision, but it was horrifyingly clear. The screen showed the door bursting open. It showed Julian, bat in hand. It showed the assault, the violence, every brutal detail. And it showed Serafina, standing in the doorway, watching. The investigator fast-forwarded to the end, to the moment I was on the floor. He turned up the audio. Sarah's voice, clear and cold, filled the small room. "You should have just signed it, Eliza. This all could have been so much easier." He turned the tablet off. The silence that followed was heavy. "Captain," the investigator said, looking me directly in the eye. "In my 20 years with CID, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of aggravated assault I have ever seen. We have the physical evidence. We have the prior harassment. We have your sister's own words establishing motive and intent." He paused. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. This was a planned conspiracy to commit a felony. His words were a vindication, a confirmation of everything I had endured. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been too dramatic or making things complicated. My truth, for so long dismissed and denied, was now recorded, time-stamped, and undeniable. My oath as a soldier was to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I never imagined the domestic enemy would share my blood. The legal battle had officially begun. Just as the investigator was leaving, a young female MP, one who had been at my apartment that night, stopped by. She handed me a cup of coffee. "I just wanted to say," she said, her voice a little hesitant, "you're not alone in this, Captain." She gently placed a folded blanket over my shoulders. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. The federal courtroom was cold and impersonal, all dark wood and solemn flags. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the weight of consequence. I sat next to Maya at the plaintiff's table, my back ramrod straight. I was wearing my Class A Army Service uniform, the deep blue jacket perfectly pressed, the ribbons and medals aligned with geometric precision. This wasn't a costume. It wasn't for show. It was my armor. It was a silent declaration to everyone in that room, the judge, the jury, and the family that sat across from me, of who I was, Captain Eliza Gray, an officer of the United States Army. Across the aisle, Julian and Sarah sat at the defendant's table. They were dressed in expensive, conservative clothing, looking like a power couple who had unfortunately stumbled into some minor legal trouble. They were leaning into the role of the victims, the concerned family members who had been unfortunately drawn into the vortex of my supposed instability. And sitting in the gallery directly behind them, a silent wall of support for my abusers, were my mother and my Uncle Robert. Their presence was a final public act of betrayal. Julian took the stand first. Under the gentle guidance of his lawyer, he spun a fantastic tale of fiction. He portrayed himself as the concerned brother-in-law, simply stopping by to talk some sense into his troubled sister-in-law. In his version of events, I had become agitated and aggressive. He claimed I had attacked him and that everything he did was merely in self-defense. His lawyer then tried to build on this narrative, attempting to paint a picture of me as an unstable soldier, a ticking time bomb of undiagnosed PTSD. He used my service, the very thing I was most proud of, as a weapon against my credibility. Captain Gray's extensive combat training, he argued, makes her a far more dangerous aggressor than my client. Maya rose slowly. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is speculating. Before the judge could rule, Maya turned to the jury. My client's skills were acquired to defend this country, not to be assaulted in her own home by an intoxicated man who outweighs her by over 100 pounds. The judge sustained the objection, but the point was made. I kept my eyes fixed on the jury. A panel of ordinary citizens, a teacher, a mechanic, a retired postal worker. I didn't let my expression waver. I let them see my stillness, my composure. I let them see the stark contrast between the unhinged woman their lawyer described and the calm, disciplined officer sitting before them. I had to trust the evidence. I had to trust the truth. And then it was time for the truth to have its say. The prosecution calls its next exhibit, Maya announced, her voice ringing with clarity in the quiet room. The unedited security footage from the plaintiff's residence. The bailiff dimmed the courtroom lights. A large screen descended from the ceiling. A collective stillness fell over the room. And then, the images appeared, stark and silent in black and white. My ruined doorway, Julian, a raging bull, storming in. The bat swinging. The fall. The brutal, silent ballet of violence. And Serafina, a motionless sentinel, watching. The entire courtroom held its breath. The silence of the raw footage was more damning than any scream. You could hear someone in the jury box gasp. You could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. The lie they had so carefully constructed shattering into a million pieces. Maya let the silent horror play out for a full 30 seconds. Then she said, "Audio, please," at the 2-minute, 14-second mark. The scene on the screen was Julian's hands around my neck, my body going limp. And then my sister's voice, clear and cold, filled the courtroom. A subtitle appeared on the screen, burning the words into everyone's memory. Sarah Gray. You should have just signed it, Eliza. This all could have been so much easier. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the gallery. The performance was over. The curtain had come down on their lies. I looked over at my mother. Her face was ashen. When it was Sarah's turn to take the stand, she was a different person. The confident, poised woman was gone, replaced by a trembling, weeping mess. But faced with the undeniable evidence of the tape, her crocodile tears were useless. Under Maya's relentless surgical questioning, she completely fell apart. "So, Ms. Gray," Maya pressed, her voice like ice, "the violent assault on your sister. That was what you considered the last resort to get her to sign the loan documents. Is that correct?" Through a series of choked sobs and half-denials, the whole story came tumbling out. The plan. The financial desperation, the manipulation, the cold decision to use violence when coercion failed. She admitted she stood by and watched, hoping the assault would finally break me. Listening to her confession, I didn't feel the triumphant surge of victory I'd expected. There was no joy, no satisfaction. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. It was the painful, final confirmation of a truth I had always known but never wanted to believe. The sister I had once loved, the one I had protected and helped my entire life, had never really existed. Her love was a fiction, a role she played when it was convenient, and when it was no longer convenient, she was willing to watch me die. The verdict came down like the final, decisive strike of a gavel. Julian was sentenced to federal prison for aggravated assault. Sarah received probation, community service, and a permanent restraining order. On paper, justice had been served. The system had worked. I had won. But after the trial, after the brief, professional handshakes from the prosecutors and the relieved hug from Maya, there was only a profound and deafening silence. Days turned into weeks. Not a single phone call from my mother. Not a text message from Uncle Robert or anyone else. It was as if, in winning my case, I had ceased to exist. My utility to them had expired. As long as I was a potential resource, a signature, a source of money, I was family. But as a human being who had been wronged, as a daughter who needed comfort, I was a ghost. That silence confirmed a truth more painful than any of Julian's punches. I was never truly a part of their family. I was a resource. And now, the resource was depleted. About a month after the sentencing, I was sorting through my mail when I saw it. A single, cream-colored envelope addressed to me in my mother's familiar, looping handwriting. My heart gave a strange, complicated flutter. A small, naive part of me, a part I thought had died on my living room floor, still clung to a sliver of hope for a real apology, for a sign of remorse. That hope disintegrated as I read the letter. It was 2 pages long, filled with her grief. She wrote about how broken the family was now. She wrote about Julian's terrible mistake and Sarah's unbearable stress. She wrote about her own sorrow and the shame that now hung over their lives. Not once did she mention my pain, my terror, or my dislocated shoulder. My experience was a footnote in the tragic story of her own suffering. The letter ended with the one line that sealed everything shut. I hope that one day you can find it in your heart to forgive us all, so our family can go back to the way it was. Go back to the way it was. The way it was a lie. The way it was a lifetime of me making myself smaller so Sarah could feel bigger. The way it was my pain being silenced for the sake of their comfort. She wasn't asking for healing. She was asking for me to return to my designated role in their dysfunctional play. I sat with that letter for hours, just holding it in my hands, the paper growing warm. I thought about forgiveness. I realized that holding on to my hatred and resentment was like drinking poison and waiting for them to die. The only person it was destroying was me. The anger had served its purpose. It had fueled me to fight. But to carry it forever would be a life sentence of my own making. So, in the quiet solitude of my apartment, I forgave them. I forgave Sarah for her cruelty, for a jealousy so corrosive it had turned her into a monster. I forgave Julian for his pathetic, violent rage, the act of a weak man trying to feel powerful. And the hardest part of all, I forgave my mother for her cowardice, for choosing the illusion of a perfect family over the well-being of her actual daughter. I forgave them not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. But my forgiveness was not an invitation. It was not a get-out-of-jail-free card that would allow them back into my life. It was a private act of liberation, a severing of the toxic emotional chains that had bound me for 27 years. I went to my closet and pulled a box down from the top shelf. It was a dark cherry wood shadow box my father had used to display his military medals, his Purple Heart, his Bronze Star, his commendations. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to hang it. It felt too final. I had kept his things in there, along with the letters he had written me from his deployments. I opened the box. The smell of old paper and polished wood filled the air. I took out one of his old letters, the paper soft and worn. His handwriting was strong and clear. Ellie Belly, it read, "Don't ever let anyone else set your moral compass. You know what's right. Trust that. Live by that. That's all a person has in the end." Reading his words, I knew exactly what I had to do. Living by my moral compass meant protecting myself. It meant honoring the sacrifices I had made to build this life. It meant refusing to go back to the way it was. I took my mother's letter, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the shadow box, next to my father's medals. I would not reply to it. I would not burn it. I would keep it as a solemn reminder of a chapter of my life that was now definitively closed. A relic from a war I had survived. That was my boundary. Not a line drawn in the sand, easily washed away by the next tide of guilt or obligation. This boundary was forged in pain and reinforced with the steel of my own hard-won survival. Forgiveness was for the past. My boundaries were to protect my future. Some people might have walked away from the army after an ordeal like mine, seeking a quieter, less demanding life, far from the rigid structures that defined my world. I did the opposite. I leaned in harder, immersing myself in the one institution that had never failed me. The army, with its unambiguous codes of conduct, its culture of earned respect, and its unwavering belief in the chain of command, had proven to be my true family. It was a meritocracy that had never asked me to be less than I was. It had only ever challenged me to become more. I requested a transfer and was granted a new assignment, an instructor at the Army Medical Department Center and School at Fort Sam Houston. It was there, standing in front of classrooms of newly commissioned medical officers, that I found my new purpose. Looking out at their faces, young, fiercely intelligent, a mix of unshakable confidence and barely concealed fear, I saw a reflection of myself a decade earlier. I saw the same fire, the same raw desire to serve. My official job was to teach them battlefield medicine, how to apply a tourniquet under fire, how to manage mass casualties, how to triage in chaos. But my real mission, the one I assigned to myself, was to teach them about the wounds you can't see. In our sessions on leadership and soldier care, I spoke to them about mental resilience, about recognizing the subtle signs of moral injury in their troops and in themselves. I created a lesson block on the critical importance of maintaining personal boundaries, even and especially with the people who are supposed to be your staunchest allies. I was trying to be the leader I wished I'd had all those years ago, one who could see the invisible scars. My own story, I learned, did not fade away into a sealed court file. The case, now officially documented as Gray vs. Thorne, became a formal case study. Maya called to tell me it was being used in training courses for the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the JAGs, as a textbook example of the complexities of domestic violence within military families. The first time she told me, a hot flush of embarrassment washed over me. My most private, humiliating pain, now a lesson plan with bullet points. But as I thought about it, the shame gave way to a sense of profound purpose. My ordeal could potentially save another soldier from the same fate. It could give a young JAG the insight needed to believe a victim when their own family was calling them a liar. My pain had been alchemized into a lesson. My scars had become a shield for others. About a year after the trial, an official email landed in my inbox. The sender was the Department of Defense. The subject line read, "Invitation to speak." My hands felt unsteady as I opened it. It was a formal request to be a keynote speaker at a joint service conference at the Pentagon. The topic was strength and resilience in military families. They wanted me to share my story. I spent a full week agonizing over the decision. The thought of standing in front of hundreds of high-ranking officers, decorated veterans, and civilian dignitaries, of voluntarily laying bare my deepest wounds under the bright, unforgiving lights of a Washington, D.C. auditorium was terrifying. It felt like inviting the entire world to poke at my scars. But then, as I stood watching my trainees practice triage drills one afternoon, I looked at their determined faces. I thought of that young female MP who had placed a blanket over my shoulders, and I knew I had to do it. This wasn't for me. It was for them. The day of the conference, standing backstage, I felt the familiar pre-mission jitters. But when I walked onto the stage and stood at the podium, a sense of calm settled over me. I looked out at the sea of faces, men and women in the dress uniforms of every branch of service, their chests adorned with ribbons that told their own silent stories of sacrifice. I took a deep, steadying breath, and I began. I didn't tell my story with anger or bitterness. Those emotions had burned away in the crucible of my healing, leaving something cleaner, stronger in their place. I told it with the calm, measured voice of a survivor, a witness. I spoke of the insidious nature of psychological abuse, the slow erosion of self that comes from familial betrayal, and the quiet, immense strength it takes to build a boundary of steel around your own peace. I ended my speech with the simple, powerful truth that had taken a war to learn. Blood ties are not a life sentence, I said, my voice clear and strong, reaching every corner of the silent hall. A family history is not a lifelong obligation. Sometimes the bravest, most courageous thing a soldier can do isn't facing enemy fire on a foreign battlefield. Sometimes it's saying the word no in your own home to protect your own peace. When I finished, there was a beat of perfect, profound silence. And then, the entire auditorium rose to its feet as one. The applause was a thunderous, rolling wave of sound and support that washed over me. But in that moment, I barely heard it. My mind, for the first time in years, was completely quiet. I felt only one thing, a profound sense of release. As I was walking off the stage, a young Marine, a lieutenant with the fierce eyes of a warrior and tears glistening on her cheeks, stopped me. "Thank you, Captain," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You just gave me the strength I need to make a call home and finally say no." I simply nodded, my own throat too tight to speak, and shook her offered hand. In her eyes, I saw my purpose. I saw my true legacy. I'd always thought that the verdict was the end of the story. I thought to myself, justice gave me peace. But standing there, finally whole, finally free, I realized something deeper. I was the one who gave myself freedom. And so, my war at home ended, not with a ceasefire, but with a declaration of my own freedom. If my story has resonated with you, it's because this battle is one that so many of us fight in silence. Please know that your voice has power, and your peace is worth fighting for. This channel is a place for stories like ours, stories of survival and strength. If you believe in the power of these stories to heal and inspire, please subscribe and become part of this community. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being a fellow survivor.